I was at a football event with Alex Ferguson, the Manchester United manager, just down the road from my UK office. We had a conversation that led to, we don't do anything about sleep. So why aren't we doing anything about sleep in elite sport with football? And that's where my journey started. Stop worrying about sleep. And worrying is its biggest disruptor. So if you wake up and you go, I didn't sleep well last night, I woke up a few times, I don't feel refreshed, you're always thinking about whether sleep is a waste of time. Because whenever you do go to sleep, you don't seem to get this long, undisturbed quality sleep that you would love and feel great that often. So it's kind of, we trying to add things into our days that almost delays the point of when we need to go to sleep. It's not the same for everybody, but that's generally what we are doing.
Thank you so much, Nick, for joining Expanding Horizon. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show.
No problem at all.
So, Nick, I want to start off by asking how you got interested in sleep science. You've had an unconventional path into sleep. So, I just want to know a little bit of how you got involved in sleep and how you managed to get involved with elite athletes improving their sleep.
There's quite a long story there, but to try and keep it short, I was a very active sports person when I was a teenager. And then I got married and fell into a furniture industry in the UK. That led me to join a company called Slumberland, who were a very big brand internationally, selling comfort products, mattresses, pillows, and things like that. During my journey, I became their international sales and marketing director at quite a young age. And so I traveled around the world. We had licensees. I helped set up the first UK Sleep Council because there wasn't a body representing sleep in the UK, like many places around the world. So I helped set that up and was chairman of that for a while. That led me to collaborate and interact with professors of sleep, using their advice and knowledge to help the Sleep Council. And during that particular journey, I became very aware that there was no definitive guide to sleep. There was lots of very important sort of advice, tips about how sleep works, what sort of things are in play when you're trying to get a good night's sleep. But they were very they didn't sort of apply to anybody, because with all the different occupations and the different people all over the planet in different cultures and all sorts of things, everybody just ignored it. So while sleep was important, an important health pillar, everybody took it for granted. So it was really sort of my journey researching sleep and looking at sleep and leading a big brand in the sleep industry. I got a bit disillusioned with the kind of messages coming out, that none of it was helping anybody, and we weren't sort of changing the sort of narrative about sleep or trying to find ways of optimizing it better for everybody. So that led to me wanting to leave the company and go and do something different. That led me to a particular unique event when I was at a football event with Alex Ferguson, the Manchester United manager, just down the road from my UK office. We had a conversation that led to, we don't do anything about sleep, so why aren't we doing anything about sleep in elite sport with football? And that's where my journey started. I started to sort of use everything that I'd learned and researched and try to apply that to an elite sport environment. I obviously had a strong personal attraction to sport, and it was literally just a very sort of quick journey over 1 or 2 years where it started to become apparent that certain things really did have an impact and an effect. And so whilst it was about performance in elite sport, it was very much more to do with trying to optimize those hours so we could recover better, injury times, awareness, decision-making, alertness, and things like that. And as data started to be collected in a broader sense, you were able to see certain things that really did have an impact on the individual. And since that particular point, which was back in the late 90s, I've done a number of things with key sporting groups over the years, and that sort of developed, giving it a name, the R90 technique, which is recovery in 90-minute cycles, which is a little simple journey going through 7 steps. And it's just looking for these little 1% factors, these little things you can, tactics and habits that will aggregate up to your overall performance. So really, that's all it was. I'm not a clinical sleep expert, but I've studied it most of my life. You couldn't get a sleep science degree when I was wandering around, but you can now. So I think when you go from sort of the late 90s to where we are today, sleep has got so much more awareness. It's probably gone way too far. And it's sort of now we're all reflecting on how we can improve the way we sleep and the types of things. But, it's a complicated sleep noise world at the moment. So it's difficult to navigate. But there you go. There's my story.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for sharing. It's a very interesting story of how you landed up there. So you did mention your technique R90 that you have given a name to. So can you perhaps elaborate a little bit more on what R90 is and what is this technique?
Well, it was very difficult when you ever mentioned sleep to somebody. They're perceived it's sort of something you do at the end of the day when there's nothing else left to do. Get your 8 hours. Don't eat too late. All these sorts of little sort of top tips that people just ignore. So it was kind of like you sort of get to the end of a day and you think, oh, there's only so many hours left before I've got to go again. So I better get some sleep. So go to bed and brush your teeth and off you go. So it was kind of trying to create a different sort of understanding. So rather than using the word sleep, go and sleep for 8 hours, I'll see you tomorrow. In a clinical environment, many of the professors I came across like to measure sleep in a 90-minute period. So they'd look at brainwave patterns being created in various different sleep stages over a period of 90 minutes. Then they'd look at the next 90 minutes and the next 90 minutes. So 90 minutes was back then the length of a football game. And I was talking to footballers and a football club. So it kind of made sense to sort of, well, let's talk in 90-minute cycles. Then we can have some rhythm to that 24 hours. We can start to look at it in a slightly different way. And 5 90-minute cycles is 7.5 hours. So sort of 15 minutes in, 15 minutes out, you've got your 8 hours, 30% of the 24 hours, which is about right for human beings. So you could start to think, well, it's 5 cycles a day for nocturnal sleep. We've also got a little key moment, which a lot of people nobody was looking at it back then. There's a little bit more reference to it these days, was that basically we're human beings on a planet, and that planet travels around our sun, and it creates circadian rhythms. It creates patterns and cycles and sunrise, midday, sunset. So the most important bit for all of us, including many other things on our planet, is sunrise, because it kickstarts another rolling 24. Basically, that becomes the most important part to anybody's day as a human, to have this point where you consistently start your day. So that became an anchor reset point. So you kind of start to look that you identify with your most comfortable occupational as you go through your decades and your other social behavior. You look at your most comfortable start your day time, So it's not you wake up at exactly the same time every day, but what you're doing is you sort of start your day around that time most days, if not every day. So that becomes your sunrise. And then what you can do is you can then chop your 24 hours up into 16 90-minute cycles from that point. So you've got cycle 1 to cycle 7 to cycle 12, and you can cycle 16. And so, a very common one, and mine as well, is 6:30. So it makes it nice and easy to think about it subconsciously, So 6:30 into 8 is my cycle 1. What am I doing in cycle 1? What sort of things am I doing to make me fully functional? What happens in cycle 2, cycle 3, cycle 4, cycle 5? And then I know that my wake cycle is cycle 16, which is between 5 and 6:30. So as long as I'm coming out of a sleep state between 5 and 6:30, closer towards 6 or 6:30 than 5, then I'm okay. Start my day. So it was really about trying to sort of like, rather than just sleep at night, when you everything, you can't think of anything else to do, so you just pass out. You sort of think, well, just like hydrating, fueling up, movement, exercise, training, all of these other key health pillars, that if we don't do something about hydration in the first 2 or 3 cycles of our day, we will feel the effects of it. If we don't fuel up, we'll feel the effects of it. We can have periods of time where we can prolong those periods, and cultures show us this all over the world. But principally, you sort of have to do something. So you've got to hydrate, to start your day. You've got to fuel up and bowel and bladder and get the waste out, and lots of light and little mental challenges, so you become fully functional. And then, so you can start to think about everything you do, your habits and tactics, in this way. So it shifts you from, I've got to get my 8 hours, but I didn't get 8 hours, I didn't get that. For people with, hectic schedules, which is pretty much everybody today, but in sports and life, and high achievers, nurses, surgeons, YouTubers, influencers, whatever you want to do, parents, is you do have to look and say, it's more like, let's look at 35 cycles over the next 7 days. Some of those are going to be back-to-back cycles nocturnally. Some of those are going to be midday or late afternoon. Some of them are going to be little micro reset cycles. Some might be, what you class as a nap, but the siesta type generic term for creating a little distractive displacement 30 minutes midday, which is very natural for humans. So really all it was the amount of people who had absolutely no knowledge of circadian rhythms, and there's a lot more knowledge about that now, but it was very simple to not forget that you're a human on the planet, right? And you react to certain things and timings. There was the chronotype, we've got bears and wolves and owls and lions and larks and things like that. And the most common ones is a sort of morning type person and a nighttime person. So that's the next step. Then we look at that to set your little ARP and get your 16 cycles, so you can start to think about tactics and habits, so that you are actually proactively sleeping during your wake hours, because you're doing things that will help your brain later give you the kind of sleep that you want. So you have to help it while you're awake, because it takes over when you go to sleep. You're out of control. And then other softer things like a balance between activity and recovery activities, that it's not a waste of time for a human being to take some time out and reset to be able to roll through these periods. Then you can look at environments, and you just remind yourself that we can sleep anywhere on anything, anytime, right? We do, all over this planet, right? And so you can't sort of go, well, I've got to have this expensive mattress, I've got to have expensive pillow, I've got to have this, I've got to have that, I've got to have that. Basically, I coach people to sleep anywhere, doing anything. And that's what you want to think about. And then we've got this world of interventions. And most things many people would just, it's so much easier today with our technology. But even back then, it's sort of like, well, I'll get a new mattress, that'll solve my sleep. I'll buy a new pillow, that'll solve it. Or I'll get that supplement, or I'll get that thing, or I'll get something because I want to sleep better, but I'm not prepared to change my habits. I just want to grab something and let that solve it. It's that little journey of the sort of KPIs for sleeping, the key performance indicators for sleeping. And it's 1 to 7, and you can just grab something out of one of those areas, and you can start applying them to your 16 cycles. You can start to think about, over the next 7 days, 35 cycles would be 7.5 hours per night, but that's not going to happen, because there's various things going on, and we've got the summer, and we've got the seasons, and we've got, all sorts of things going on in our lives. So you sort of look at it then and go, well, maybe Wednesday would be 4 cycles and 6 hours. because I'm going to go to bed later. I'm going to sleep later. Maybe I've got to catch a plane. So I'm going to get up earlier at 5 o'clock. And how many times was I able to take 30 minutes out in the afternoon? For most people, that's an absolute nightmare. How do I do that? However, once you start to train yourself and you start to look at your schedules and you start to feel the benefits of how powerful a 30-minute period can be for you, whether you go into a sleep state or not, you become more productive, you sleep better quality, all this sort of stuff. So you can really start to see that, well, most definitely on Wednesday night, I'm not even going to try and sleep because I'm doing something the following day, which is creating a lot of anxiety, a lot of adrenaline, stress and worry or excitement, and if I try to make my brain sleep when all of these things are going on, it's just going to be almost counterproductive. So I've learned how to do other things about recovery throughout the period on Tuesday through Wednesday and then Thursday onwards. So I can start to see that 28 cycles a week is optimizing me better than trying to go for 35 cycles. So you can start to really get a better understanding of what's going on, what are you doing, and the ultimate goal is to find a human-centered approach to it with the least amount of interventions intervening with that process, the ones that really do matter to you and will help you because we're all different. And you can start to really get a grip on it. So what you end up doing is you stop worrying about sleep. And worrying is its biggest disruptor. So if you wake up and you go, oh, I didn't sleep well last night. I woke up a few times. I don't feel refreshed. You're always thinking about whether sleep is a waste of time because whenever you do go to sleep, you don't seem to get this long, undisturbed quality sleep that you would love and feel great that often. So it's kind of, we trying to add things into our days that almost delays the point of when we need to go to sleep. It's not the same for everybody, but that's generally what we are doing. There's something we could be doing, we do it, and then just fall asleep because we get used to the sort of feeling of being in some sort of fatigue state. We can use stimulants, energy drinks, coffee, caffeine, things, whatever. We can use stimulants to sort of override this process, but ultimately it'll catch up on you and it'll show itself in all different types of areas like decisions you make or your health or immunity or your eating habits or your exercising habits or your relationships with other people. So what we use that to do was that every single elite athlete are at the peak of their performance, and yet one of them will just go slightly quicker or do something that means they break the line before the other person. One of them will do that. And that's really what happens when you don't have a focus on sleep, is you become a shadow of who you really could be, but you don't notice it. So it kind of, the R90 technique sort of starts you to become brighter, more productive, more effective, happier, create more space in your day to do lots of good things, not always chaotic job things. And suddenly you become this much brighter person who handles anxiety better, handles stress better, can deal with good things and take advantage of them easier without thinking about it, and can also deal with those uncontrollable, not so good things that when they come into you, how do you deal with them? And that's really why it's a very simple, straightforward technique for anybody to adopt, and it's basically free.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good technique, and thanks for elaborating on it. So, do you think this R90 technique can also be used by normal people, or this is more like focused on athletes with controlled schedules? Can everyday people
Oh,
implement this?
yeah. I mean, principally when you sort of look at it, circadian rhythms, chronotype, sleeping in cycle, environments, and when you look at that, what basically those are the key factors for us all as human beings. It's just that I first introduced those types of things in a sort of structured technique to elite sport. because I didn't do it intentionally then, but I have been doing it for 25 years now. But at that particular point, it was, look, if you adopt these things as a human being and you happen to be a manager or a coach or an elite player, if you adopt these things, they're going to have an impact on you as a human. So it was really like a lot of things today. If you go to that top demographic, if you go to elite sport and you introduce something there and they mature it, they develop it, they iron out all the problems, then it becomes something for us all to adopt. So it's that actually it's got more sense for everybody rather than elite athletes.
And when you bring across this technique to elite athletes, when you coach them about sleep techniques, how is their reaction? Like, is it hard for them to change their behavior? Do you find resistance because they are at the top of their game? So, do like Manchester United players or any football players, do you find it difficult working with them, or do they find it hard to implement these techniques? So, how's that been like?
Initially, it was a long, hard journey, almost going from one project to the next and not knowing where the next project's going to come from. It's very much about the gatekeepers, the individuals involved with any particular group. It's about the individual themselves. So I was very lucky because Alex Ferguson was very open that if you don't know anything about something, find out, right? And let's go and investigate it. It wasn't like, oh, that sounds daft. Let's go and have a look. There's various players and athletes and organizations along that route which just went, we look at absolutely everything in our sport apart from sleep. So get Nick in. Even today, there's a lot of talk about sleep and lots of podcasts and books and all sorts of things and that you can access. But even today is a very small percentage of any sporting organization who actually do something specifically around sleep. They'll talk about it. They'll do things. They'll grab a tracker and go, oh, we're tracking sleep, so that's fine. Tick that box. Not everybody's open to it, but the one thing that's always been relevant is if certain people do things and other people become aware of it, then they go, well, I need to do that as well. So a lot of the people that I've coached, a lot of the organizations I've worked with, they've been extremely successful people. And so somebody hears about that and goes, well, I want that as well. So when you've got that sort of natural referral, like everything in life, when you've got that natural process, but underlying all of that is they basically, if I ask them truthfully, the question, and the same to you, Neil, is they want Nick to come up with a way where they can sleep for 30 minutes a day, get all the quality they want from it, so they can do even more. Right? So they don't want it to take, 8 hours sleeping, an hour before then, an hour coming out of it. That's 10 hours a day. The only other thing I do for 10 hours a day is breathe longer. You know what I mean? Everything else does not take 10 hours a day. So it's like, can we not do it quicker and faster? So that's the real thing is they come to me because they know that I'm not going to ask them. I'm not going to tell them that they've got to sleep longer. I'm not going to tell them that they've got to get their 8 hours every night. I'm not going to tell them they've got to have a consistent bedtime. I'm not going to tell them that they can't wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning or catch a flight at 3 o'clock in the morning or play games on their gaming machines at 2 o'clock in the morning because they're a PM chronotype. They know that I'm going to create a nice little picture of them, and all they're going to do is develop some nice little tactics and practical and achievable habits that they can start applying, and they'll build and build and build. And the more they practice, the more they train it in, it just becomes a completely subconscious technique, and it will protect them for now and the rest of their lives. And they'll probably save hours, right? Because it's just like me talking to you right now. If I do certain tasks, Neil, at certain points in the day, I am aware that my polyphasic inner circadian clock is saying to me that I shouldn't be doing those types of things at certain points in the day. it's telling me that I should be careful about doing certain tasks because I'm a morning chronotype, not a nighttime chronotype. So I can still live in a 24-hour global world, but as long as I'm aware of these little things, I can have little tactics to sort of protect myself as I go in and out of them. If I don't, instead of answering that question in less than 10 seconds, it's just took me nearly a minute, right? So your clarity, your decision making, your alertness, um, the things that you do that are unnecessary. And when you ever come across somebody who's really got that sort of time management mindset, and particularly that sort of sleeping mindset, is you don't know what they're doing, right? Because they don't go curling up on the floor fast asleep in front of you, or they don't do this, but they seem to be able to go bike riding at 11 o'clock at night, right? How do they do that? They seem to be able to eat at any time they want, right? Because they're always shifting their cycles and their rhythm and their pattern and adjusting and adapting. They can do certain things which would normally be quite difficult for them, like me going to the gym at 9 o'clock at night when I'm a morning type and I want to be in the gym at 7 o'clock in the morning. You know? So, but I can do it if I know how to create that rhythm and pattern. So, I think that's basically where it comes to. They go, Nick's going to stop. He's going to save me investing in things I shouldn't invest in. He's going to take away all the, the fluff and all that stuff around it. It's going to become nice and easy, nice and simple, and I will become a better athlete for it and save time. So it's kind of that shift of a lot of sleep experts and sleep clinicians. It's sort of like, well, you've got to have a consistent bedtime. Who's got one of those? When I'm talking to surgeons and doctors and parents and frontline workers and people who work in a 24/7 environment, so, well, we can't do that. So they kind of just ignore it. It's that sort of thing, is that the whole premise of the R90 technique, the whole drive of everything you do is to make somebody a much better person because of it. And that's the goal.
That's interesting. And so, if the 8-hour consistent bedtime is no longer an indicator, what are some good indicators that people can keep track of? You had brought up KPIs. So, like, what are some sleep indicators that people track of? Is like something on the smartwatch that we should track of? Like, what are good indicators that are good for even normal people or even athletes to like track to know how things are going?
The sort of tracking side, which is sort of two sides to it. One's very specific performance orientated tracking, when you're actually doing the exercise or the training or the activity itself. There's the sort of health and well-being side to it, which is absolutely fine, to, heart rate recovery, things like that, and pulse and things. And then it's sort of, if you translate some of that data into another area, right? Into an area where it's sort of like, well, this indicates how you're sleeping. Now, whilst the sort of sensors and the tracking detail is pretty accurate in some respects, right? It's not truly accurate. So there's a lot of people who wake up and look at the tracker information and they feel absolutely great, but the tracker says don't go to work today, and you just ignore it, right? So it's kind of like you can create anxieties and stress around sleep data because it's data created by certain things while you were asleep, when you were out of control. So the things you want to look at is your activity while you're awake. So it's sort of good, healthy, balanced diet. You're always focused on that. Obviously, moving and exercise and time out. The big one is how many times do you actually stop, right? So I think Whoop, or certainly supported, founded by Whoop, have come up with a new tracker that tells you nothing. It collects the data, but just vibrates, to tell you that it's probably time for you to just take a few minutes out because certain things are sort of out of sync. So it's not telling you what's out of sync. It's just telling you should stop. So you can see where when you're looking at data, it's what data means something to you. No, it's not the whole thing. It's what sort of bits. Like HRV is a very good one for a lot of people, but it's sort of, It's not about how many hours you got last night and how much deep sleep you got last night. That was a consequence of what you were doing throughout the day and the days before them. So you really try to focus on things that, you know, from cycle 1 to cycle 2 to cycle 2, once you start to sort of remind yourself, and you can put it on your watch or your tracker if you want, or you just remind yourself that in any 90-minute period, I need to take 2, 3, 5 minutes out just to distract and displace myself to help my brain reset before I then move into another stage. And what you're doing is helping your brain to helping yourself and your brain to go, we can actually stop, right? And we can actually reset. And it's all part of the overall recovery period. And if you just start to think, well, over the next 7 days, can I allocate, 30, 40 minutes day, sunset, midday, sunrise, midday, sunset, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 6 a.m. It's these 4 phases of our 24 hours that just keep rolling on. It's nothing to do with Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So when you look at it like that and say, I don't need to look that far in any research to know that human beings sleep naturally in a polyphasic way, not just one monophasic block. So this 30 minutes is not about going to sleep. It's not about napping or snoozers for losers. This is about a really specific reset point when I just do things that are just completely distractive. I've got athletes who started to learn to play the guitar. Guys, the guitar's, over there in the corner. They got bought one as a present. But that 30 minutes, what they do is stop and get the computer on and they learn a chord or a thing. And so every day, that 30 minutes was not focused on sleeping. It was focused on a lovely distractive, another kind of not normal kind of activity. But there was a benefit because by the end of the week, they can play Beatles' Hey Jude on the guitar. So it's kind of rewarding. But sometimes during the course of that week, when they stopped, they actually went into a little sleep state because the brain's getting used to you jumping out. And when you jump out, it'll put you to sleep on a train. It'll put you to sleep in the back of a car. It'll put you to sleep on the sofa watching the telly. It'll put you, when you allow it to happen, right? When you give yourself the space, your brain will tell you that it wants to grab that recovery and it's coming. So you grab it. So it doesn't happen every day. So it's not really about what's on your smartwatch. It's just like, if you start with thinking, set my ARP, let's say 6:30, 6 o'clock, or whatever it is. And then there you've got your cycles. And you just think, right, I'm going to try and think about my meetings, think about my schedules, thinking about all the things I do. And I'm going to try and create that 30 minutes for me, right? Either in cycle 6 or 7 or 8, right? I'm not going to make it specific to which cycle, but it is in that second phase of my day, right? And if I don't achieve it, that's fine. But I was aware of it. And so if over the next 7 days you got 1 in, because we call those controlled recovery periods, right? If you got 1 in, great. Maybe next week you get 2 in. Maybe next week you get 3 in. And you start to think, and these little micro reset moments, just standing and looking out of a window, Neil, right? It sounds nuts, but it's just like, if you've got that sort of 2-liter hydration bottle on your desk with your screens and your laptop, so you don't leave that position working with the screens, all the sort of stuff, you can be there for a number of hours, right? Because you can hydrate from your desk. If you put that hydration bottle somewhere different in your house or your office, every 90 minutes, get up, move away, make a few steps, look out the window, hydrate for a couple of minutes, and that visual stimulus to your brain and you will have an enormous effect on the next 90 minutes of your day and the rest of the day. So it's really more about creating your own little R90 tracker in your head. Don't beat yourself up. I know it's 35 cycles over the next 7 days. Fine. I'm quite happy. It's gone very hot in the UK, not as hot as it probably gets in India, but it's certainly got very hot over here. So we're all talking about heat and we can't survive. And then in a few months' time, we'll be talking how cold it is and how we can't survive in that. But I know that during certain periods, 28 cycles, I'm absolutely fine. I know that 7 CRPs, one every day, is amazing. But if I can get 5 out of 7, that's amazing too. If I can get 6 little micro reset moments, in the first 2-3 phases of the day, if I can get just 6 of those in, or 5 of those in, or 2 of those in, they're going to really help with not wasting my nocturnal sleep hours. So that's really where I'm not interested about what my tracker says about sleep. I am interested about certain signals that might say my health and well-being is a bit off cue. But, I try to eat as best I can. I try to hydrate the best I can. I try to do as many things that I know the best I can. But I also try to live my life with a smile on my face. And sometimes those things don't equal a good, healthy, balanced approach. So it's kind of like understanding that these sort of things keeps me in a nice place, but don't allow them to be with you all the time, right? Because they're going to dip, they're going to go up, they're going to go down, because there's so many variables in a lot of things we do. But I think when it comes to sleep, what you have to understand is that absolutely everything that's going on that you are creating or being influenced by is going to affect your brain's ability for it to do what you think it's going to do. And remember, you know, you can, I mean, what's the fasting process through Ramadan and things like this in different cultures? You got people up in Iceland and it's still bright daylight at nearly 12 o'clock at night. And you go, what's all that about? So you kind of look at that and so the brain is brilliant at making adaptations to adjusting itself to reacting. So it will keep doing that. But the one thing you want to do is give it a really good chance. And that is to give it some rhythm, give it some pattern, give it some cycles, give it some timings, and try to be inside of that rhythm as much as you can, more often than not, and everything else about what you do. Because if you get that sort of R90 technique sort of flowing subconsciously, yes, I've got a tracker, yes, I've got this, but I don't take too much notice of everything it's saying to me. For a lot of people, it's just, well, it's a piece of jewelry. Because if I haven't got this tracker on my wrist, I'm missing out, or this ring on my finger. But you've already seen, we won't even have apps on our phones. We won't even have things on our fingers because, there's these little AirPods that have just been launched, and like you've got an AirPod in, and all it's doing, it's tracking all this information, and it's just telling you, hi, your HRV's up. And you go, that's all right. And you just said that to you while you're walking down the street, so you kind of think things are going to shift, things are going to move. But a lot of these companies and a lot of the bigger companies and everything else, including me, we're just sort of saying, you've got to stop chasing sleep, right? You've gone from taking sleep for granted and you don't care about it. And then suddenly, in a very short space of time, we're chasing it, trying to come up with everything we possibly can and make trillions of dollars out of everybody selling them sleep products and coaches and things. So you stop chasing it because you haven't even started with step one yet. And that is, how do you create a definitive approach to your sleep that will optimize your sleep hours and do what it wants you to do and stop you worrying about it? And if you do that for a period of time, then you'll really start to make some significant steps.
What do you think is a low effort but high impact activity or something that people can do to improve their sleep? That doesn't take too much effort or is like so obvious, but it has a big impact.
I think sort of, not to come back, but I think that sort of, there's lots of examples. When you look at somebody's behavior, there's lots of little things that they do. And I sort of go into their environment, into their life, and I spot things. There's a guitar over there. How many times do you play it? And they say never. Right, we might bring that in. They've got 3 or 4 coffee machines in the kitchen. because they really love making special coffee and da da da. And you think, okay, you see certain things like the hydration bottle they're carrying around with them all the time, and they never put it down and all this sort of stuff. So it's what look for something that will, one of your little habits, one of your little things, and hydration is a really good one because we all have to do it, is just by putting that bottle somewhere else. So you just have to go to it. And if it's by a window, even better. And I think there's a little trick. So these little distracted moments, right? To just get yourself away from somewhere and just step outside or by a window or something, just to help that process. I think the one thing that really does have an impact is the exposure to in daylight. There is an energy wave called blue light, and we get scared about it. It's on our devices, so we all start buying blue blocker glasses and all this sort of stuff because blue light's bad for you. Blue light is absolutely amazing because that's what sunrise is about. Inside of that daylight, the blue light's there. It gets through into your light receptors. It creates a hormone called serotonin and unsuppresses everything about you. So it's absolutely brilliant, right? So when you look at light exposure in human beings, it can be, depending on where you are around the world, anything up to what's called 80,000 to 100,000 lux. Lux is like a measurement of light. Lumens is another one. So when you look at that, even on cloudy days and as you go through the season, so it can be 40, 50, 60,000 lux outside in daylight. Our average exposure, we know this, right? Because you're walking around outside in a hunter-gatherer type mindset. You're going to get things, you're going to do things, moving, is the average exposure in the first two phases of the day, sunrise into sunset, is around 10,000 lux, right? Because you're moving around, you're looking up and looking down, and sometimes the light is not quite as strong as it is. So that's your average, and you're inside and outside, okay? So what you start to think of is, am I getting exposed to an average of 10,000 lux throughout the first two phases of my day? Now, what does that mean, Nick? Well, what I do is I translate back down to in the first cycle of your day, ARP 6:30 into 8. The first thing you've really got to do is get immersed in 10,000 lux. How do you do that? Well, if you can step outside for 5 minutes, or you can just change your habits on the way to work so you're a bit more outside than inside, is you're trying to do that. You might have to recreate it with a lamp, right? To recreate that 10,000 lux to stimulate that process. So that's one. So, one of the things I got some young athletes to do a long time ago when they're all getting scared about blue light and putting blue blocker glasses on, and teachers and all sorts of, is just go onto your app store, find a lux light meter, right? There's free ones. Get it on your phone. It uses the camera. You can get very scientific if there's any photographers listening to your podcast, but I just use the simple one because where I'm sitting, so what we do is where I'm sitting right now, it's less than 100 lux, but it looks quite bright. The sunshine's coming through the window. Where I'm sitting, within 1 meter closer to that window, it goes up to 3,000 lux. 1 meter of where I'm sitting. If I step outside, it's 75,000 lux. The other side of that glass, not the other side of some blinds or curtains or anything, just the other side of that glass. So when I start to say, put your hydration button somewhere else, but it's the office, everywhere else, check the gym. I go into so many health clubs and gyms and high performance arenas, and the light is atrocious. What it's doing is anything 100 lux, or even in some cases 1,000 lux, anything under that, and what your brain is producing is melatonin, not serotonin, because there's the light's not there, and melatonin is trying to suppress everything. So the longer I sit in this seat talking to you without raising, going from 500, I need to get to 60,000 just for a few minutes, because that gives me an average of 10. You know what I mean? I can't. So it's one of those little things for anybody listening is once you've had 7 days wandering around with a little light meter on your phone and the bathroom, the toilet, the gym, the office, outside, inside, everywhere you go, and you suddenly go, right, that treadmill in the gym that's closer to the window means my training session will be optimized. That treadmill that's slightly further away from that window, it's harder work, right? And so you really start to get that 16 cycles rhythm and pattern when you start to think about light. And it really does, you know, it really does help. It's an enormous shift. For some, it can be a proper, use the words game changer, life changer, and everything else for people, because suddenly their relationship with every environment they go into starts to shift. They start to think about maybe just, a couple of minutes in a sort of micro reset moment before they do a gym session, just in the changing room with a towel over their head, right? Or sitting in a steam room or a sauna just before they do something. It's just using these little things and they start manipulating everything that goes on. So that's where I would start, is micro reset moments and light, because that will, when you asked me a question before and then I'll shut up. You don't tell an athlete what to do or to stop doing this and change that and change that. You just don't do it. And none of us like doing that. What you do is you take them on a little journey and you go off like this and all over the place. And then a month down the road, they look back and go, wow, look what I was doing back then. Look how I felt. Look at my data points. Look at this. It's all shifted. And I wouldn't have thought that you would have made me do that. But I have. And that's the one. If you suddenly start thinking, I can't spend too much time in that environment without getting that. I can't spend too much time there without that. There's too much light, so I'm overexposed to light and underexposed. So once it starts to think that your little habits, your little micro reset moments actually develop because of your relationship with exposure to light. So that's normally what changes it, because you just say, right, we're not going to tell you to do this, this, and this. Well, what we all do is say, right, Nick, I've been in 500 lux for the last 40 minutes. I need to go and up it to 2,000, 10,000 lux now before we go on even further, because otherwise I won't break that record later. And so you see, suddenly the whole thing starts to shift around. So that's it. Micro reset moments and exposure to light, and get yourself a light app. It'll be a fascinating journey.
That's very interesting, because I never thought about light in that way and how light can impact sleep. So it was definitely new for me. One final question. We touched upon chronotype before, like a morning person, an evening person, night person. So how helpful is this? How useful is this? Can it be changed? Or do people use it as an excuse?
It's two things. You've got the sort of in-betweener, and the in-between, because we all pretty much live in an AM as world, a morning types world, because we have a start time to the day for our occupations. Doesn't apply to everybody because they work night shifts or whatever, but we sort of get the kids to school or it's going to work. So basically, we ignore our chronotypes because we've all got to go and do those things. But we're always aware that it doesn't matter how well we've slept. We just feel like, you're in the world of finance. The only time, Neil, I can do my business accounts is first thing in the morning at 6 o'clock, because my brain just goes 2 + 2 = 4, right? Sign them off, gone. If I try to do that midday, 2 + 2 = 4, I just need to check that again. Where did I get 2 from? Where did the other 2 come from? And do they actually add up to 4? I'm not going to sign them off. I think I'll ask Neil to check it. So whatever certain things. So I think what it is, when you decide about your career, you think about long haul pilots and short haul pilots. You think about night shift working and day shift working, and 3 days night shifts, 4 days day shifts. You think about those occupations, and it's not to stop you doing them, but you just know that you need to have some sort of tactics in play to allow you to do those things, because otherwise it's not going to be for a very long time before you burn down or shut up. I think the people around you, right? Friends. Well, Neil, if you're my friend and you're a PMer and I'm an AMer, you don't want to come to the gym at 5 o'clock with me, do you? In the morning, right? But it's a really healthy and trendy thing to do. Let's join the 5 o'clock club, the 5 a.m. club. And so you're going to say yes. Well, it's all right to say yes, but you've got to get up at 3:30. The cycle before 5 o'clock, right? You've got to get up there and you've got to do all these wonderful things, and then you can join me at the 5 o'clock club. Otherwise, if you just turn up at the gym and you were still in bed 10 minutes ago, that's going to be really damaging for the rest of your day. How do I come to the gym with you at 10 o'clock at night when you're quite active? When somebody asks me to do something, I say, and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I said, you'll have it by tomorrow morning. Yeah, but we want it by this evening. So it's not going to happen, right? I can do it and I can spend time on it, but I tell you what, you'll have a better version in the morning, right? So just wait till the morning. So the people around you, your bosses, your colleagues, your clients, it's just like a personal trainer. It's just like anybody in finance. When you've got clients and you're advising them and what everything else is just ask a few little questions that gives you the indication of what's their natural characteristics. So when you communicate with them, what you say and how you word things with them at certain points. When do you meet them? It's like, I've got a dentist appointment on tomorrow morning, right? At 9 o'clock. Now, I make sure that my dentist is a morning person because I'm one of his first clients at 9 o'clock in the morning. You see? And I don't want him to have been lying in bed half an hour ago and he hasn't had a drink, he hasn't had breakfast, he hasn't done this, he hasn't done that. So the people around you, the people you advise, the people you work with, and then obviously, when you get to that particular point of choosing possibly a lifetime partner, well, did you establish what their chronotype was before you started any serious relationship? Because if you've got two AMers together, they're both fighting for certain parts of the day to do things. I'll do all of that in the morning. Well, I want to do all of that in the morning. None of you want to do that later on. And the PMers, so you sort of go, oh, a PMer and an AMer, that's a nice yin and yang mix because I'll deal with the morning, they'll deal with the evening, and we have a lovely relationship. It's always about sort of, sleeping habits and all sorts of stuff. So what I think it is, you don't just go, well, the thing is don't just ignore it. Ask yourself these little questions. If you're on that island and you have complete control, you don't have any financial worries, you don't have anything at all, you had complete control, what would be your most natural time? For me, I struggle to get past 6 o'clock, right? And I'm starving, and I'm hungry, and I'm active, I'm mentally aware, I can do stuff and everything else. In the afternoon, I want to make things like boats and chop trees down and whatever. You can very easily find out that in an ideal set of circumstances, this is how your 24 hours would pan out. When you would exercise, when you would do this, when you would do that, and that'd be a wonderful rolling, natural, rhythmic pattern. So all you do is use those 16 cycles to always be thinking about, can I make subtle little adjustments into when I do things or why I do things or how I prepare for things that are coming my way so that I can sort of have more feeling of I'm trying to be a little bit more synchronized with my natural chronotype. Because, if you're a lion, the one thing that you learn very quickly is do not hunt during the day because you'll starve, right? you hunt at night. So you can, when you look at, a lot of people ask, can you change your chronotype? Of course you can ignore it. Of course you can camouflage it. Of course you can override it, right? But you can also sort of say that when you are, there's a little bit of a genetic twist to this, Neil. So it's a little bit in you anyway, but there's also your formative growth years. You know, if you were brought into the world and both your parents, their activities, is your formative growth years and where you were born on this planet, to what sort of time zone, circadian rhythm, things like that, they will have an effect on how you've adapted to the environment where you're living, right? But in general terms, you can't change it. So it's a bit like, you going to the northern hemisphere and suddenly, wow, I can't deal with this. It's 12 o'clock at night and it's still bright. It's like midday. But if you've been living in that country since you were an infant, from a week old, a month old, you've been going through that whole process, then your natural internal circadian rhythm will have made adaptations for you to be able to shift that. So if you take somewhere out the northern hemisphere and chuck them on the equator or chuck them away, they will struggle to readjust, right? But they will eventually. So that's why we sort of, like jet lag, traveling through time zones, shifting from one side of the country to another, all of those types of things. It's very similar. You've got a sort of chronotype lag that you want to sort of start to think about maybe 50-50. That'd be a good start, because probably most are 70-30. 70% of the things they do are not aligned with their natural human chronotype characteristic. So you get 50-50 and you're probably doing really well, it's that work-life balance type of thing, isn't it? That sort of area where it is. But it's amazing. I can see you smiling because you just know, don't you, that there are certain things that I simply, if I didn't take a 30-minute period out and recreate that microsleep, I wouldn't even think about trying to do my accounts at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It
Yeah.
would be absolutely pointless.
No, very true. But does it also change with age? Like, I would see like teenagers, young people are maybe awake at night, they sleep during the day, and older people perhaps wake up early. So does age also like impact the chronotype?
It's sort of like, I'm always a great one for as we go through each decade, 0 to 10, 10 to 20. And things change, don't you? Your careers, your families, and things like that. Basically, what happens is as you shift into your, 50s and 60s, your whole lifestyle's shifting around. So your everyday approach is far more aligned to your natural chronotype because you're not getting up to go to work, or you've become successful and you're not working in an office anymore. Exposure to light changes, your chronotype comes to the fore more often. You've not got all of those other types of pressures around you, so you're probably a bit more active, walking a bit more, not necessarily all the stressful stuff. All it is you sort of become a little bit more synchronized with a sort of human-centered approach. Your sleeping habits, in general terms, they sleep less. When actually you want to look at that and go, hang on a minute, why isn't some of that going on now? Because it's not because they're deteriorating. It's not because they're much older and wiser or anything else. It's just when you look at somebody's lifestyle 7 day a week, they're eating at certain times of the day because they choose when to eat. You know what I mean? They eat healthier. They eat this, they eat that, and they're less stressed and less pressurized and da. And in general terms, if you haven't, if you're a nighttime chronotype, an owl, well, if there's nobody's going to stop you waking up and starting your day at 9 o'clock in the morning, then you're aligning yourself with your natural chronotype. But for the last 30 years, you've been getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get to work for 8. So what's changing? But I think that the lovely thing is, but out of all the people who've read my book around the world, and I've got an ebook, digital, simplified, step-by-step, bang it in 7 days, sort it out in 7 minutes type of thing on every ebook platform that you can go to. for sort of £7. The most important group are the younger generation. I mean, they just love it because they can see the logic in it. They can see, like, well, some of their friends like playing games till 2 o'clock in the morning. They understand why. Don't shout at them, right? They how do they get through their days? How do they deal with all sorts of things? How do they manage their lives? And it makes so much sense to them is to, rather than go, this is really complicated and it's going to impact on me, is do something about it. So a little micro reset, standing with me and looking out of that window, helps them with social media. It helps them with exams. It helps them with relationships with other people. It helps them with the pressures of adolescence and all of that stuff. What are they actually going to do? What are they going to do with their lives? Which is a massive question for a lot of people, a lot of young people around the world today, because we're in this moment of enormous uncertainty and change that's so exciting, but we haven't got a clue what we're going to be able to do tomorrow and what we won't be doing tomorrow. So they love it because it's just, that's how they can cope with a very stressful, pressurized times in their lives, because they love it, because the book and me are not like their parents who are shouting at them to do their homework at the same time every day. Don't do that. One's an AMer, one's a PMer, one of them's losing out here. How much time do you spend inside and outside? The parents don't normally live lifestyles which exposes that younger generation to that. The workplaces don't look at these things. So you've got to sort of spend so much time in 500 lux. So they love it because they want to do their homework at 12 o'clock at night. They want to grab an afternoon siesta because it helps them with phase 3 of their day. They very much want to have more lessons outside, rather than always inside. So they can see that if you can use that sort of technique and that understanding to create a more synchronized approach in your own world that helps you with everything else around you, that's got to be the best thing to do to be successful, rather than just be immersed in it, swimming without, just getting completely swamped in it all. So they love it, which is cool. And I mentioned before that I do these KPIs of sleep. So they're called KSPIs of sleep because you just put key sleeping performance indicators. So there's 7 KSPIs. Now, the kids in the schools all over the world, they call them KISPIs because that's what it says. It says KISPI, KSPI. So they sort of go, have you done a KISPI today? Yeah, I stepped outside and had a drink with Joe. Tick box. So they can really start to sort of manipulate it. So I think anybody reading my book or looking at that playbook or listening to this or whatever they're doing and wherever they're going, even if they think they sleep really, really well, I would just step back and reflect, because you could, you're probably, you want to live. Longevity is a big thing for all of us. So you really want to live a long and healthy life. You want to have every decade being very productive and being very active in all those particular ways. And you sort of, if you can change your perception of, it's not sleep because that's passive. It's actually sleeping. So it's sleeping, like hydrating, like exercising. It's a mental and physical activity that goes on while you're awake by using tactics and habits. And if you get that a little bit more aligned, then hydrating, fueling up what you're eating, nutrition, and exercise, all of those things will get a lot better than they are now. You'll get more out of those things from what you eat, what you drink, everything, right? Because you're getting this first health pillar. You're getting that right. So you kind of think that all the things you do now, your career, what you eat, what you drink, exercise, healthy, how much information from your tracker, all of those things you're doing, if you're just still thinking sleep is a passive thing that you do at the end of the day, right, then those things are not being optimized.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick, for coming on the podcast and sharing so much and, telling us about the technique and tips. So it was really great having you on the show.
No problem at all. Thank you very much.